Well, good afternoon and welcome to this afternoon's talk. I'm Graham Kime, as Kate said, the curator of the show, but I have to say that it was really a joint curatorial process, and we're lucky that Jiawei is here this afternoon to fill in all that detail that probably I haven't grasped completely as we go around looking at the works and talking about Jiawei's fascinating history and of course the artwork that he has produced, in this case since 1961. So I think the earliest work is done by Jiawei, has been done by Jiawei when he was 13 years old. So we're really looking at a great survey of Jiawei's output and going through the various phases of the times in which Jiawei was making work. Because, of course, Jiawei was born in 1948, as we have on the wall over here, in Shanghai, and then lived somewhere to the south of Shanghai.
Yeah, close, very
close by. And by the time Jiawei was about to graduate from high school, in fact, just when he was going to sit for those final exams at high school, where he was already thinking that he was going to be studying to go to art school and study to be an artist, the Cultural Revolution began and the exams were cancelled, the institutions were closed, and so that whole trajectory that we might normally think of as, you know, as young people, what's going to happen next, we're going to go to school, university, etc., that was all gone. And in its place was the Cultural Revolution, of which Jiawei took part. As a young person already involved, Jiawei's explained to me that prior to the Cultural Revolution, a few years before, there was already a lot of political activity. There was already something in the air, as it were. Things were going to start to change. So Jiawei's art, I think, and I think Jiawei would agree, is very much influenced by this period, by the experience of the Cultural Revolution, and the early works reflect his experiences of the Cultural Revolution. And then we come to a period after that when Jiawei, I think, reflects upon what did this political process do, really, and what did it achieve, and looking back at perhaps the unfulfilled dreams that many might have had for communism in China right from the earliest period, back in the 1930s or earlier. And then he comes to Australia, where he's now perhaps best known as a portraitist. And when you look at the early works, you'll see that Jiawei's interest in portraiture was already there. He has many images of his comrades where he worked on a farm in Manchuria, as did many young people in China at the time. So you see his evolution into being a professional portraitist, and perhaps his most well-known portrait is of Princess Mary, which we'll come to. We might just have a look at this little painting here, which I think is a lovely work. Jiawei made in 1966. It's called The Conversation. It struck me, thinking about that title, that there are a lot of European paintings with a title like The Conversation, two people just sitting down talking in a garden or a yard. This is in fact Jiawei's school, his high school, and this young man here is a member of the Communist Youth, and this young man here wants to join the Communist Youth. And so The Conversation, 1966, the outbreak of the Cultural Revolution, is about this young man wanting to be part of the Communist Youth movement. And I believe he's holding a little red book, is he?
Before the red book, also Mao's book.
Mao's book, yeah. There we go. So we have some young ladies here who are coming back in. They must be doing some field work, literally, because they've got hose on their shoulders. So here we have Jiawei at school, thinking politically. It's a benign title, The Conversation, but we know it's charged with meaning, because what's happening here is the Cultural Revolution's coming, and here's a young man who wants to take part in this. And remember that the Cultural Revolution was very much focused on young people. Okay, so here we have the earliest work that's in the exhibition by Jiawei, and it's actually from a photograph, correct, of a Russian movie poster. So we can see I'm not sure what the actual story of the movie is, but we can see that there's a certain a hero, I guess, a heroic figure with a young man there. It has that kind of movie poster quality that's perhaps evident in all movie posters, but this one's a Russian movie poster. And I guess what's significant about that is that in terms of the kind of art, at least from European sources, that's available to Jiawei, it's mostly Soviet socialist realism, or what we call Soviet socialist realism, which was the kind of painting which often had a heroic revolutionary figure in it. And it was an art form that is representational. It's celebrating the sense of socialism that predominantly in the early times Stalin's version of socialism. So it's about heroes. We have a work here of a Cuban image. So we see there's some interaction at the time between various socialist countries. The imagery is perhaps coming backwards and forwards, and Jiawei's picking up on this notion of the revolutionary image. So, as Jiawei just said, many people were sent to the countryside, and Jiawei went to Manchuria and painted portraits of his comrades on the farm. And the place is Heilongjiang, and it was the Production and Construction Corps, and Jiawei explained to me that it was a corps like a sub-army. The PLA is the army, People's Liberation Army. They're the real soldiers, but these young people on these farms were considered like a sub-army, and if there was to be any outbreak of war, particularly with Russia, then they would be called up to take part. But talking about Jiawei's portraiture, you can see that it's already beginning back in this early phase of his life. Standing Guard for Our Great Motherland is the first painting that I actually saw of Jiawei's, and it was here in 2000, I think, the first year the gallery opened, in a show called Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, which was also curated, funnily enough, by Lawrence Tan, who's going to talk next and who's curated the show in there. So there's a funny kind of synchronicity happening here. And I must admit, when I saw Jiawei's painting, I was really struck by it. I thought it was a fabulous work, a fabulously crafted work, and a very striking and powerful image. And I'm not alone in thinking that, because this painting has now been to the Guggenheim in New York and to the Guggenheim Bilbao. Is it Bilbao? Yeah, Bilbao. So it's a celebrated example of the painting that was done in China at this time, and it was done in 1974. Yes. And it depicts 2 PLA and 1 Corps guard, as Jiawei's told me, when this work was done especially for an exhibition that was the second national exhibition to be held during the Cultural Revolution in 1974 in Beijing, and artists all over the country were asked to make work to submit to this exhibition, and this was Jiawei's entry, but it had to be something to do with him, and he wasn't in the PLA, the people that did the watching, so he put in a Corps Guard as well, so it would be acceptable under terms of the exhibition. And it was then sent to Beijing. It was accepted and hung, and it was recognised. But when Jiawei got to the exhibition in Beijing, he found that the faces had been changed. So what we're looking at here is, of course, studies, and this changed. The faces were considered not quite red enough and round enough, so they were changed to make them look more suitable, which was something Jiawei was a little bit upset about, as any artist would be. But it's a great story, because eventually, after the Cultural Revolution's over and Mao dies and the Gang of Four arrested and tried, the painting is removed, isn't it, from display in the National Museum and rolled up and sent downstairs into the basement, I think. And Jiawei is able to rescue it. It's now in Shanghai, yeah, in a private collection. But it's a painting that to me is not only a really striking painting, but the story somehow says so much about that whole period and what came afterwards and what can happen in politics and art when they mix together in that way. It's a fascinating history. Actually, I might get Jiawei to explain the history of this painting because I think he knows it a lot better than I do. Do you want to tell us about the people that are depicted in this work?
This is partly copied because the original work is did in 1987. In China, this is a private commission because his daughter is living in US and she wanted me to copy this one. So my earliest work. But you can see that this is Edgar Snow, is an American journalist, and he first person reported the Red Army for the world. But even his book be published in 1930s, 1937, and even his book is already recording said in that time feeling very friendly with people, and even never see the people said call the Chairman Mao said is our great leader, our great nobody that in his book recording like that. So I read the book is when the book was banned. Since Mao get power in 1949 until he died, the book is banned. So I just read the book is preparing for demolished, and somebody stole it and brought it to me. So afterwards, in 1980s, I had get opportunity to say I can my feeling to read the book. Also, if you very carefully, you can see in that people, most of this road in here also appear. This is Marshall Pendleton is announced as people's enemy in 1959. So that time, he's the commander, very famous commander. And this Liu Shaoqi is the party leader in here, this man. And in that time, Marshal Lin Biao announced replaced him, become Mao's new successor. In here is behind Mao, the young man. Quite a talented commander, but only a few years after he became new enemy and killed when the plane crashed.
Thanks. As a curator, I've seen this painting be painted. Jiawei was working on it, and I've seen the extended version, which is in China. And when I was looking at this recently, I think these two, in some ways, sum up for me Jiawei's eventual resolve about the whole project of communism in China and the Cultural Revolution. Because in a sense, what all these people were fighting for was that great future that never happened. Perhaps because of Mao's strong influence. And in some ways, these young men here, these boys who communist youth, show that dream that never eventuated, that due to circumstances and personalities, that whole project was never brought to fruition in the way that they might have thought it was. So I think these two works are really significant in the sense of Jiawei's resolve of that whole process of participating in the Cultural Revolution and then reflecting upon what might have been.